and I looked at the looks on the faces. There were tears. There was anger. There was tremendous disappointment. Were looks of betrayal. And driving home from that meeting on that Thursday evening, I made a vow to myself, I'm never going to create that situation again when I do any practice transition anywhere.
Hey, ambitious dentist, welcome to Start Your Dental Practice, the show for existing and aspiring dentists to take your dental practice to the highest possible level. I'm your host, Jonathan Van Horn. Every episode, we aim to demystify the how to start a dental practice problem by bringing on world-class dentists, influencers, and consultants in the dental industry to pick their brain about how to get past the barriers involved from going from no practice to being a practice owner to owning your own successful dental practice. Hello, ambitious dentist. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Paul Sletten, the founder of the Sletten Group. So one of the most common things I get from listeners of this podcast reaching out to me to talk to me about what's going on in their lives is that they are looking for a practice to acquire, which we've talked about in the past, that acquiring a practice can be an amazing opportunity for a lot of dentists, but there's a lot of pitfalls or a lot of challenges. There are a lot of issues that come up in the acquisition of a practice, and even finding a practice just to buy can be hard to do. There's a lot of brokers out there that have dual representation that not everyone is really certain what that even means. But today's guest is someone who is there to help transition dentists into practices that they're acquiring, to transition them successfully. This is a person that came from me personally, from one of our clients from our CPA firm, Tooth and Coin. And so I know from experience that he does a good job of what he is saying he is doing for dentists out there. So it's my pleasure to have on the podcast, Paul Sletten. Paul, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
So, Paul, one of the most interesting things that I can find out about anybody that's in the dental industry is how did you come to this revelation that you're going to help out dentists? And it looks like you've been doing that since 1975, so you've been doing it for a long time.
Yes, I have. I met a former bank president in Minneapolis who had a lot of dentists in the bank as bank customers. And he made the observation that these are really bright people and enjoyable people to work with, and that almost none of them had any training or preparation to own and run a business. So he left the bank eventually and began working with dentists. One of the first people he helped was a buddy of mine from college who had become a dentist, and that really impressed me. So that's how I got into it.
Nice. And, whenever you're getting into this, whenever you're doing, helping people buy practices and, have successful transitions, what are some of the main mistakes that people are making right now in practice of failed transitions?
They're not looking carefully enough at the type of practice that they're getting into to see if it fits them, to see if it suits them, to see if it matches some of their core values. Every practice has a personality or a culture, and that culture is an extension of the core values of the owner or owners of that practice. And whether we discuss this or not, or are aware of it or not, dentists and their staff are constantly teaching their patients what to expect when they come to the office for care. And so you need to know, you need to ask about, and you need to know and understand what the practice culture is, what things are they doing. For example, what happens in the first telephone conversation when a new patient calls the practice? What happens when they drive to the office for that first appointment? Is it easy to find parking? When they walk in the door, are they greeted with a warm smile and a welcome? Does the schedule run on time? How do they see team members treating one another, and what kind of an atmosphere is in the practice? Is it an up-tempo, happy atmosphere, or is it full of tension and very somber? How do the handoffs go with the patient from one person to another in the clinic area of the practice? How are money issues discussed? Do they do comprehensive treatment planning? All those kinds of things are just extremely, extremely important. Overall, is the patient made to feel important? Is the patient made to feel that they are the only person that exists for that moment, for those moments when they're in the chair and receiving treatment? Or is it an impersonal kind of a setting, and you can't check off very many of the things I just mentioned? Because if it is, and that's not like you, you're not going to like it there. But if they're doing things that you would want to do in practice, by your observation, you need to go deeper in your analysis of looking at that practice opportunity seriously.
So why do you think that is that so many people focus on the numbers? And now, and this is me coming from a numbers-based person. Like I went to school. I thought I was going to be a math professor. Like I thought that was what my calling was going to be. Is I was going to be a university math professor. And so I had a very strong math background. When I got into this industry, I always thought I could math out the best possible practice profit scenarios. And I thought I was going to be able to go into a practice and I was going to be able to math it out and tell them, hey, do these things and everything's going to be great. And same thing with, acquiring practices. I thought, hey, I'm going to be able to use my math skills to be able to analyze these practices. I've got my business valuation accreditation. I can tell them, what the ROI on the cash flow is going to be and whenever they purchase the practice and things like that. But whenever I got in, that's what I saw. It was that, hey, the practice may be the same practice, but when there's a different owner in there and there's a different practice philosophy, then everything changes. Like everything changes. The practice philosophy, the practice culture, everything, it all is different. So why is it that so many people focus on the numbers? Now, obviously the numbers are important. We have to have cash flow. We have to have, patients. We have to have revenue. But why do you feel like people start there rather than, the culture, which is, to be fair, is a much harder thing to gauge, to me maybe it's just because I'm an uncultured person. I don't know if in Arkansas we're allowed to say that we're cultured or not. But why is that?
Well, I think I certainly agree with you that the numbers are extremely important, and so are the contracts. When partnerships don't work, or there's a failed associateship that was supposed to have led to an ownership opportunity for the incoming doctor, when that doesn't work, it's almost never because of the numbers or because of the contract. It's almost always because of the interpersonal relationship and the lack of connection. It's almost always behavioral. These things fall apart at a behavioral level. You have to have, if you're going to go into business and into a partnership or into an associateship leading to ownership at some point, you've got to make sure that you've got a really strong chance of succeeding in that environment because it suits you. And that's why we have to take a little more time at the beginning up front to be sure that you interpret the numbers and understand the numbers in the context of the core philosophies of the owner or owners of that practice.
And how do you analyze this? So, for example, we have clients that are trying to buy practices, and it feels like we're having to tiptoe through everything because none of the employees know that the doctor is selling. It's this big top secret mission to try and sell this practice without anybody finding out.
Yes. Let me please share a story with you. When I first got started in this business in Denver, in one of the first practice transitions that I did, a dentist called me and asked me if I could help him sell his practice. And the rules of engagement were, as laid out by the dentist, I was a young man just starting my business. And he said, I want to get this practice sold. I want to get the loan approved by the lender. And I want you to work with me, with my CPA, with my attorney, and with my banker. I do not want my staff to know anything about this. I'll tell them right at the end. And I did my job perfectly. We did it exactly that way. We introduced, I met the lender. We got the whole package done. And the doctor called me and said, I'm having a staff meeting at 5 o'clock on Thursday to talk with my staff. You can be there if you want to be. And I said, yeah, I'd like to be there. So I showed up for that meeting. and we sat around in the reception area of the practice, and he dropped the bombshell. He told them that he was selling the practice, that there would be a new owner there on Monday, and that he was in a position to be leaving within about a month. And he wished them well and thanked them for sticking around and helping with the practice and helping the new person be successful. And I looked at the looks on the faces. There were tears. There was anger. There was tremendous disappointment. There were looks of betrayal. And driving home from that meeting on that Thursday evening, I made a vow to myself, I'm never going to create that situation again when I do any practice transition anywhere. So in our transitions, once the doctor's plans are in place and the timetable is established, we strongly encourage our practice sellers to let their staff know what the plan is. And if we're out recruiting somebody, in this case, working for the owner of the practice, looking for a buyer, if we're out doing that, doing a search and placement, we want that buyer candidate to have ready access to the staff, because that's where they learn a great deal about how the practice functions and about this culture that we've been talking about. The risks of losing the staff because they have been betrayed by hearing only about the transition only at the very end is much greater than any risk of letting them have the information about the plans up front. If we're bringing candidates into the practice, we want them to meet the candidates. We want their input on whether or not they feel that a person would predict highly for success in their environment. So we take a different stance on that issue, and the staff and the patient retention, which is the whole idea for buying a practice, right?
Sure.
Is to retain the patients. The patient retention and the staff retention is just terrific when you do it that way.
And I see your point. You're saying that basically, if that is how the seller is approaching it, then what is it that you're going to be buying? Like what type of a minefield are you going to be buying whenever you walk into that practice? I can see a bit of to be devil's advocate, I can see a little bit of the
Sure.
fear and the uncertainty of the seller. Hey, if I let people know that we're thinking about leaving, then what if my hygienist jump ship and everybody's afraid that their hygiene is going to steal their patients. But
sure,
I haven't.
Sure.
In all but the oldest of practices, I've not seen that be an issue. And so I can see a little bit of that fear.
I've never seen that happen.
Yeah, so
we've done 3,200 transitions.
Right, and I've seen it once. Whenever I think the dentist was in his almost 90, and and he passed away, and then the hygienist went to another office, and all the patients followed that hygienist basically. But that wasn't, there was no transition, there was no actual transition done. It was basically the person who bought the practice, quote unquote, basically just bought the hygienist. Right. But everything else has been, has not been that case. I'm not dogging any hygienists that are out there listening, but that's just typically how it goes. Most of the time, the patient's loyal to the practice rather than to the hygienist. So okay, so your failed transitions culture. Let's talk about it again. How do you start? I mean, you mentioned the patient experience. You mentioned the employees.
Yeah.
I talked a little bit about doctor productivity, provider productivity, philosophies on production, case treatment, things like that. What could a new dentist that is trying to buy a practice going out there, what is it that they could be looking at to help gauge this as a fit for them? And I guess another question is because this is something that it took me a long time to figure out in the business that I own, is what is it that I want? What is the culture that I need as being my own person? Like, what is my culture that I like to be a part of? I mean, is it more important for them to figure that out first, or they need to figure out what's out there?
It is. No, it is. How do I want to practice? We ask our clients who are looking to buy practices, we ask them, if you could find your ideal practice, please describe it to us. Where do you want to live? What kind of lifestyle do you want, and why? And then look for practices in that area that match as closely as possible to what you've defined as ideal for yourself. Do you want to practice solo? Do you want to be in a group practice? Do you want to be in a metropolitan area? Do you want to be in a more rural area or a smaller community? What suits you? What suits your lifestyle? Over time, we've met dentists who can answer yes to any and all of those questions I just raised, about where they want to live, because sometimes they want to go back to the kind of life where they grew up. But that taking a personal inventory of what would be ideal for you is absolutely the starting point when you're beginning to look for a practice.
And then how do you go and analyze if whatever you find is a match? And if it's not a match, are there shades of matching? Like, culture is one of those things that it just doesn't fit in a box. Like, it's such a wide view type thing. Like,
yes.
Can you go find a 70% match and that be good enough that you can adjust it? Or is that something that again, I'm probably trying to put quantitative numbers on the qualitative element of business here. But a
70% match would be a pretty good match.
Sure.
It would be a pretty strong beginning, a pretty strong platform for a person. You've got to be able to spend time with the doctor, with the owner. You need to know what do they do when a new patient, non-emergency new patient calls the practice. How do they bring new patients into the practice, and why? And is that the way you would do it? Is their accounts receivable under control? Have they taught the patients to pay at the time of visit? Or do they have an out of control, poorly managed accounts receivable? If they do, if it's poorly managed, one of the first things you're going to have to do as a business owner is you're going to have to go in and fix that. But these patients have been trained not to pay at the time of the visit, and you're going to be wearing a black hat when you try to change that protocol and that system in the office. And that's a bad way to start. What if the practice fees are substandard for the area? And in order to improve cash flow and get the business running like it should be, you're going to have to raise those fees. Well, you're going to be the bad guy or the bad lady again, because you are having to do something that is going to tick off a whole bunch of people who are patients in that practice and have been there for a long time. So you want a practice that's under control. You want a practice that's well run. You want a practice that doesn't have a lot of turnover on the staff. You want some longevity. You want people who want to stay with you post-closing, because the endorsement by the seller, the introduction and endorsement, is going to be extremely important. So you want a relationship-based practice, because only in the practices where they're relationship-based, in addition to having fine clinical quality, et cetera, will the endorsement of the owner have any clout. There's a secondary endorsement, though, that's even more powerful than the first, and that's the endorsement by the staff. That's the endorsement when Mrs. Jones, who's been in the practice for 25 years, is in seeing her hygienist, and she says, "What do you think of the new doctor?" And the hygienist knows all about the new doctor and says, "Oh, let me tell you some things," and gets into that enthusiastically. Or what if the hygienist says, "I don't know. I just met him today myself." Now that Mrs. Jones says, "Well, are you going to stay here?" And she says, "Well, I'm not sure yet." And that's when the patient says, "If you go anywhere else, please let me know." And that's back to the topic we talked about a couple minutes ago, but it underscores the importance of having a team on board.
100%. So in addition to talking about the team, let's talk about the way in which revenue is generated, or production is generated, from the patients that come in every day. I see very often I'll have someone that is 3 years out of school and they're looking for their first practice, and they come to me with a practice purchase opportunity, and I'll say, "Okay, how much revenue are we doing?" "Okay, we're doing $1 million in revenue." "How many patients do we have?" We have 800 patients. And I say, to the dentist, like, "How much in production are you currently doing at your office?" Is, "Well, I'm doing, I'm running for a DSO, working for a DSO. We do a lot of state based insurances, and we're not as busy as I'd like to be. And right now I'm doing about 50,000 a month is what I'm doing. And I was like, "Are you busy?" And like, "Yeah, I'm kind of busy." Okay, well, right now you're doing 600,000 a year. This doctor is doing 800,000 based off what I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
And he's doing it with less patients than you are. How are you going to do what he's doing? Well, I already do all the things that he does. I do, more. I'm doing implants now too. And this person doesn't do implants. Okay. Well, how are you going to be, if you're doing implants, how come you're, you're doing, 3/4 of the production that this guy's doing in a month?
Yes.
That's a different practice than what you're used to being in. Are you ready for that? And how does someone, so I know how to look at it from a numbers-based perspective. I don't know anything else other than that. Clinically, I'm lost after that. How does someone understand if what they're buying is something that they can replicate? We had a really smart guy who's bought a lot of practices on, a good friend of mine, Hunter Smith here in Arkansas. They own like 10 or 15 practices now or something like that. Acquired all of them. He gave some information. He said his point of information was if you're acquiring a practice, you should buy the biggest practice that you can replicate the revenue in. So for example, if it's a $1.2 million practice and you can replicate it, which I would argue that the culture is a part of that and able to replicate it or not.
Yeah, sure.
But he's basically saying from a production ability standpoint, if you're only able to do 800,000 a year in production personally, then that's what you should be trying to aim for finding to buy, because you're going to be able to most quickly replicate that cash flow that you've invested in. So how does a dentist that's buying a practice to look at production and figure out if they're going to be able to replicate what this person's doing or not? The example I was giving, the person that was selling the practice had been doing it for 30 years, very high end. It was like a speaker on a lot of high end dental subjects.
Sure.
Very technically, skilled, was an instructor and things like that. So that one was a little bit obvious that he was going to be walking into a practice that had was more high end. How, some of them are not as easy to understand. What is it that you have people look at in terms of that?
One of the first things that you want to look at when you're beginning to do your due diligence in reviewing the practice is some of the practice management reports. For example, a production summary, a year-end or year-to-date production summary that shows precisely where all the productivity is coming from. How much is coming from hygiene? How much is coming from the doctor, if it's a solo practice, or doctors if it's a group practice. But let's say it's a solo practice, and this report breaks it down and shows that exactly the clinical categories where that productivity is coming from. So the first thing you do is you say, do I do all those things? Sometimes the doctor's referring out a whole bunch of things like endo and some other things that the incoming doctor might do, and placing implant, although you might not do all the implants, you would do some of them, and that would add productivity. So you break it down by really doing a careful analysis of that production report as a starter. The other thing I would look at is, what are the seller's procedural times for all the clinical procedures that the seller does in the practice, and what are your procedural times? How much time do you need for a crown prep? How much time do you need for your fillings and things like that? And then I very strongly agree with your friend and colleague in Arkansas who's been buying all these practices, that you buy a practice that you can manage, or that you can even grow and build. I don't think you buy one that's going, if you're capable of going at 100 miles an hour, I don't think you buy one that's already going 200 miles. You're going to have to jump on that train and catch it.
Yeah. So talk to me as far as, you talk to me about how to analyze a practice. Let's pull it back a little bit farther and say, how is it that someone finds a practice for purchase?
We very recently had worked with a person as a buyer's representative, who went back to her hometown where she had grown up. It's a community of about 150,000 people. She liked the lifestyle. Her husband was from the area as well. So they went back there. My advice to her was, and she looked at a few practice opportunities, but oftentimes the really good ones barely get on the market before they're gone. So I helped her put a letter together, and we got out the ADA directory, and she mailed a letter to every dentist in that community, a general dentist in this case. We work with specialists, all specialists as well, and sent them a letter to everyone who was 55 or older and said, I'm doing a confidential inquiry into what your plans might be for the future. I'm looking to purchase a quality dental practice in this area. If you would like to have a confidential conversation with me about it, I would love to do that. And she sent the letters out. She introduced herself. She had a bio paragraph or two on her, and she sent the letters out, and she got one response. But that one response is the practice that she now owns. And we've had that happen a lot in all kinds of communities. So that's one way to do it. You can talk to the dental suppliers. You can talk to area or local brokers. You can talk to lenders. You can talk to lab people. I've done that. We found buyers for seller clients. We did a Canadian transition. We've done lots of them in Canada. But we went to the lab that our client used and said, have you seen any really bright, talented young dentists who might be looking to own a practice? And the lab owner led us right to the person who became an eventual buyer. And that buyer, this happened about 15 years ago, and that buyer now has a much larger, more dynamic practice than the seller had when they found it. So those are some ideas on what you can do.
Yeah, we definitely see that the best practice transitions typically stem from a personal relationship, whether it be a father to son, or it be
Yes.
The dentist went to that dentist whenever they were growing up and they knew him for their entire life. And those seem to be some of the best transitions. Second to that are the ones that and you can't replicate that, unfortunately, in a lot of situations. And I have a feeling the reason those are successful is because that person is already aware of all those culture items that you've talked about.
Yes.
And then the second one is that, kind of the way to hack your way into those situations is about what you're saying, sending out letters, getting in front of people. Another thing I like to recommend people do is, if they're new to the area, is to take people out to lunch. Like, just say, hey, I'm in the area. I'm a new dentist. I'm wanting to be a practice owner at some point. I know you've been here for 40 years, and I'd love to hear about your experiences as a practice owner, just so I know what I'm getting into. And just go take them to lunch, just learn from them, and tell them that you're interested at some point in being an owner. And if that person doesn't know how, if that person isn't selling their practice, they might know someone who might be considering it, because dentists, they all run in the same circles. So yeah,
I agree. That's a very good approach as well.
Yeah. So, but it's hard. I mean, it is really hard to you gotta wade through a lot of practices that aren't going to be up to snuff to what you're wanting for a lot of the times. Tell me this. Do you mind smaller practice acquisitions? When I say smaller, I'm talking about, if there's a practice that's doing 300 to 500,000 in revenue, is that something you tell people to go and try and buy, or is that something that you shy away from? I've met a lot of people with a lot of different mindsets on that.
Jonathan, I'm not much of a fan of fixer-uppers in terms of dental practices. You can occasionally find a real jewel by finding one that's doing $300,000 or $400,000 a year. But basically, what you're going to want to look for, and this is your area of expertise, and we deal with it on every transition, of course. You've got to look for something that's going to cash flow. You've got to be able to buy that practice, pay the overhead, make your bank note payment, make your school loan payment, and have a good living income left over. You don't want to be the indentured servant for 10 years while you're buying a practice. So I like to have my clients buy healthy practice. And by a healthy practice, I mean one that's trending. It's not in decline. we have a lot of people in dentistry who have real difficulty, and I understand this because it's difficult to decide when you're going to quit or when you're going to retire. But there are a lot of dentists who don't ever put a plan together, and so they go year after year after year, continuing to practice the same way every year. And when that happens, it's kind of like running in place. When that happens, the practice is going to absolutely go into decline. And it might be a modest decline, but it's very difficult to measure attrition and how many patients are being lost to the practice. People keep track of how many new patients are coming, but when those new patient numbers dwindle and when the person is just every year looks like last year, I feel badly for those people because everyone needs a finish line. Everyone needs a tape at the end that you can run through. Otherwise, you're just running laps. So I'd rather see a robust, healthy practice that cash flows well. You're going to have to pay a little more for it, but you're going to have a lot more left over that goes into your bank account after you've paid all expenses as well.
I'm definitely in that camp as well. I'm not. I find that it's typically is too hard to build those small practices back up.
Yes.
Than it is to go ahead and start with that head start. I typically would rather someone do a startup dental practice than to take over a recovering practice.
Yes.
Really, the only exception I have to that rule is if, and usually you can see this, but usually it's not a practice doing 300,000 to 500,000. It's usually a practice doing 600,000 to 800,000, and they've got a lot of patients. That's when I bend more on, because if they do have a lot of patients, that usually means and it's a typical story of the dentist has just been kind of coasting for the last 10 years.
Yes.
Then that one's a little bit easier of a one to do, but those aren't that common. So we're definitely in the same camp there. So how, another question we get a lot is how to know whenever the dentist is ready to be a practice owner. What are your thoughts on that? How does somebody know, okay, it's time for me to be a practice owner?
We deal with that every week. We're talking to people, multiple people a week on that topic. And I like to, some people can come right out of a residency and do a scratch start. Although if you take a look at dental specific lender attitudes, they're not real big fans of doing those kinds of loans. They want somebody to have some experience. It might be a couple of years of experience. I'll give you an example. In the Southeast, we have a client situation right now where the new associate in the practice is someone who had worked in a variety of situations. They had worked in a private practice. They had worked in a couple different corporate settings. And they'd spent about 3.5 years doing that, and finally woke up one morning and said, I think I'm ready to own. And what the primary mover in making that person come to a decision point was that I want to start being in control of my own destiny as much as I can. I'm tired of working for other people, and I want to start making the choices and the decisions. I know I'm going to have to put a team around me to help me do that. I'm going to have to find a really good CPA or a dental CEO like you are in your company. And they're going to have some good players to help them. But if they've got the drive and the initiative and the work ethic and the desire to excel, if they're willing to work hard at getting better clinically every year of their practice career by taking continuing education courses and exposing their employees to similar courses and those kinds of things, if they're willing to understand the incredible value of surrounding themselves with talented team members and things like that, they can find people to help them get the business principles solidly installed. They can bring in a practice management consultant if necessary, and make sure that they're really strong on systems and protocols, and put a business plan together. But I think it comes from wanting to have some independence and some control over where your life's going. You're ready for that, you're ready.
What would you say to the people that are afraid of the risk associated with being a practice owner?
It's an interesting discussion, risk, in that what's more risky, to invest in a business, make it really thrive, and you feel really good in it and about it, or never owning something and working for other people. If you can handle that, and there is a portion of dental school graduates who do that. They don't want to have to think about the practice when they go home at night at dinner. They don't want to be preoccupied with it on the weekend and that kind of thing. And so they're looking for dental jobs. That doesn't describe the whole profession at all. But there are those people out there, and that suits some of them. But for someone who really wants to be part of something that's going somewhere good, I think you're going to have to be in ownership. We've got some things going on in the market, though, that are really bothersome. You've got dental school loan totals are skyrocketing all over the place. Our record in our company, we've encountered one periodontist who has school loans of $1.1 million. We have lots of them north of $500,000. And if they have that kind of school loan debt, they're thinking about risk all the time, unless they're totally cavalier about it, which is very scarce in terms of what we see. And so that colors the picture too. But your school loan debt is basically for your ticket to the dance. That's what got you to the place where you're able to practice. Making the next investment, which could be very substantial, in buying an excellent practice, you just have to sit down with somebody who understands the finances of that practice and have them go through it with you and talk about how it cash flows. What kind of return on investment can you expect, and what is going to be required of you to do that? I think that helps you. That helps people overcome just the paralysis of thinking about a number that just shorted your brain out in terms of the investment you'd have to make in buying a certain practice. It can be done. I've always believed this. My grandfather and my father and mother taught me this way back. And if you want to learn how to buy a practice or how to own and run a practice, go talk to people who are really successful at doing that. The first thing you'll discover is that people like that are very generous with their time, and they really enjoy talking to and educating or even mentoring someone who is looking to excel in the profession. So talk to people and ask them how they did it. And just like you were talking about, a few minutes ago about having the young doctor go and take people to lunch, that's a really smart idea. And I think it pays really good dividends.
Yeah. What about this? Do you feel like it's a good time to be a practice owner right now?
I do. I'm bullish on the future of the profession. There are all kinds of things at play. We could have another lengthy discussion on this topic, but if someone wants to, I think the opportunities to excel in the profession are really excellent. One of the things that distresses me a little bit is that we live in a community here in Denver, Colorado, where people are coming here in large numbers. That's been happening since we moved here in 75. But we're exploding with growth, et cetera. You see a lot of young docs come and sort of pile on top of each other in the metropolitan areas and the suburbs and various places in the core city and so on, and create a real strong saturation. I would also strongly encourage looking at places that have growth potential and haven't already experienced most of their growth. And almost every dynamic city has places like that. We certainly do here. So again, in site selection and practice selection, those factors come into play as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that whenever I made the jump from being an employee of someone to owning my own practice, what I looked at was you really don't have much more or much less risk by being an employee of someone else, because if you're an employee of someone else, I mean, you could come to work the next day and be fired. You could come to work the next day and there's a buyout from a DSO. You could go to work the next day and your owner doctor has something awful has happened to the practice, and you're going to be out of a job and you're going to have to go find another one. There are just so many risks associated with it. And one of the things I talk to people about now is that, okay, let's say you go buy a practice and you just maintain the practice and you just keep it going. Okay. You probably make a little bit more money, or hopefully will make more money, if you have good advisors helping you with the situation and you analyze it correctly. And then if you decide that that's not the world for you being a practice owner, then you can always just sell it back again. Somebody bought it for that amount. You bought it for that amount. Sell it, maybe hopefully for a little bit more than you bought it for. And then you can still go work for somebody else. You'll probably be more valuable as an employee at that point, because you've dealt with some of the issues that owner's had to deal with. Maybe you can go find a place where you could be a profit partner rather than a managing partner. So there's you gain a lot by being a practice owner, and I don't really feel like it's that much more risk than being an employee of someone else. And if it is more risk, it's only slightly more risk in my mind, and the benefits typically, now there are associates out there, believe it or not, that make $300,000-$400,000 a year as associates. There's not many of them, but they are out there. And if you're one that's making 100 to 150, which is probably it depends on the area you're in, obviously, and things like that. Then if your risk is only slightly higher, but you're tripling your income potential, that's a pretty good gamble. In terms of if you're going to Vegas and you're saying, okay, I can triple my entire net worth if if I take on 5% risk in this transaction. And if I lose, I'm not technically not even going to lose really much of anything. The risk of loss is so low. A lot of people would take that gamble. So I'm a big fan of entrepreneurship and doing it and being your own boss and everything like that. So, it's been a really interesting discussion. I always enjoy talking about buying practices and the transition. And you've highlighted a lot of things that I've even said on the podcast before. I don't know why people don't look at these things. I don't know why people don't talk about culture more. I don't know why people don't talk about, treatment planning more, because when I've analyzed all these different practices, they're always different. And, just because the old doctor did it that way doesn't mean you will be able to do it that way with your technical skill or your case presentation skills or your, let's call it salesmanship. Like if you've got somebody who the seller is is able to sell, iced and Eskimo, and you have a problem looking someone in the eyes and telling them that they need to get a crown, because you're afraid of the $1,000 it's going to cost them, then that's a big conflict. That's something you've got to figure out before you buy the practice. And if you're only looking at the numbers, then you're missing some of the point.
Yes.
You're missing some of the point. So I'm happy to have Paul in my my Rolodex of people that to send people over to. So Paul, if someone wants to get in contact with you, what's a good way for them to find out more about you?
I think the best way to do that is to get on our website, the www.theslettengroup.com. Sletten is Sletten, or to contact me on my at my email address, which is paul@lifetransitions.com.
And you told me that you're also going to be sharing a checklist for our listeners that actually reach out to you as well. And what's going to be on that checklist?
Absolutely, I'm happy to do that. The checklist is the list of all the information that you want to request and retrieve. It's a data request checklist when you're looking at a practice opportunity. And it'll give you good insights into the important information, including the practice management reports that you want, in addition to tax returns for the practice, profit and loss statements, etc.
Fantastic. Start your dental practice, listeners. I urge you to reach out to Paul. He's been gracious enough to give us his time, which, as I always say, that's the one thing we're never going to get more of. So him giving some of that to us is very valuable, and we really appreciate it. He has a wealth of knowledge in the acquisition of dental practices and helping people with successful transitions. So if you're looking for your next practice, and I didn't even ask this, do you work in only the Denver area, or do you work throughout the nation?
No. We work throughout the country. We have done dental practice transitions in all 50 states and 6 provinces in Canada.
Fantastic.
And even a couple in Australia. So no, we have a large network.
So if you're listening now and you've been on the fence about buying a practice, and the reason you've been on the fence about buying a practice is you don't feel like you know enough about the actual process of the transition, and you are afraid that it's more than just the numbers, and you want somebody to be able to help you out with the level above the numbers, give Paul a call. He's going to be able to help you out. So Paul, again, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Jonathan. I really enjoyed it.
Start Your Dental Practice podcast listeners. I will see you next time on the podcast. So that's it for today's episode, but that doesn't mean that the learning and implementation have to stop there. I've created a free report called The 15 Numbers That Will Make or Break Your Dental Practice. This report has been downloaded over 1,000 times by dental professionals. So if you want your free copy of this report that's going to outline what the most important numbers are in any dental practice, and it also includes how to look at your numbers, how to set goals, has a whole slew of really important information that is the culmination of all of my experience as a dental CPA, then just go to startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. That is startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. And so that's it for today, Ambitious Dentist. Again, I'm Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV. I'll see you next week with another world-class practice owner or consultant that will help you start your very own dental practice.